Liino is the latest operator to come to Arknight's Enfield, being a will and agility scaling electric support that's tailor-made to enhance the performance of electric and nature teams, providing incredibly strong buffs and consistent healing with the press of a button. Through her stances, she locks herself out of basic attacks, but in return gets a high interrupt resistance, boosts her team's attack, and passively heals those around her. When reactions are applied or consumed, her combo skill can be used for a massive personal energy boost. When her ultimate is ready, using it yields a high amp for electric and nature damage. Her general gameplay needs little direct player interaction. Use her battle skill, then her combo skills as they come. As she can't basic attack, there isn't a reason to swap to her outside of very niche scenarios, and her combo skill cooldown is relatively low, so not much thought is required to align up with rotations. But this simplicity beguiles how strong she is, because the raw value of these buffs and heals makes her competitive in all forms of endgame content. In fact, from a damage standpoint, Calcs have placed her rotations of Zhong Fangyi and Arcane as the highest DPS out of any team in the game to date, and it's not even close. Admittedly, DPS isn't a good metric for character performance, as content in Enfield isn't the kind that strictly rewards damage, with stagger, animation length and setup speed being just as important. But Liino offers enough value to her teams that she ranks as one of the most competitive supports, being a new mainstay to electric and nature teams. So let's have a look at her kit, potentials, weapons and gearing options, as well as her teams and rotations. Once we're done, you might just see why Liino is as good as she is. Liino's battle skill is Dazzling Focus, and it's the core of her kit. It costs only 25 SP, and on cast she will attack the enemy once and create an area around her, entering the Vocalist stance. After 3 seconds, operators inside this area will be healed, the value of which scales with her agility. Additional attacks can happen every 10 seconds, with healing pulses repeating every 3 seconds. These pulses are distinct from the battle skill's animation. Even if Liino uses a skill, this will not reset the timer on the additional attack or the healing pulse, although time stops do still apply to them. Note that the attack that she performs when the battle skill is first casted does animation lock her out of combo skills for a short period. Thankfully, it's only the initial attack of the battle skill. The additional attacks that come afterwards won't animation lock. This battle skill will build 3 stagger on cast and only then. Additional attacks and healing pulses do not contribute to it. Liino will also buff the entire team with an attack boost, maxing out at 10% at M3. Although operators must be inside of the battle skill's active area to receive healing, the attack boost is applied unconditionally. The Vocalist stance lasts for 60 seconds, and the remaining time can be seen through a musical note by her portrait or as a faded circle on her battle skill button. While it's up, Liino will follow the controlled operator around, but it can be ended early at no SP cost, where it will go on a short 3-second cooldown before it can be used again. Keep in mind that as soon as she's out of the stance, the attack buff from it will immediately expire, so try to minimize its downtime. While it's active, it has the unique property of locking Liino's basic attack and dodges. Pressing or holding basic will lead to some special visual effects, like thumbs up, hearts and light sticks appearing around her, but that's all. Dodging will do nothing. Whether she's controlled or non-controlled, neither can be used until she exits the stance. She does, however, gain high interrupt resistance while in it, ensuring that she can't be knocked out of the stance by most enemy attacks, which could be situationally useful in speedruns. So although Liino is best left as a non-controlled operator in most circumstances, there's the odd use case here and there, like avoiding banana peel slips. Unfortunately, as it prevents her from dodging, that means she can't avoid enemy attacks. The interrupt resistance will prevent her from being knocked around, but against highly aggressive enemies, like the Breaker Beast, she can take more damage than she can heal. Admittedly, even when operators can dodge, they don't always, so this isn't too big a problem. As non-controlled operators get a passive amount of damage resistance, it isn't something that matters for the vast majority of stages. If anything, it'll make sure that she can't be locked out of her combo skill if she gets hit, as there'll be no hit stun to recover from. Not being able to dodge can make her be easy pickings for some enemies who can grab operators. If this happens to Liino, it will also immediately cancel the Vocalist stance. Thankfully, many grab type attacks in the game check for a character's interrupt resistance, and Liino's is so high that save for a few very specific moves, she's going to be immune. Liino's ultimate is Dawn Star Concerto, costing 160 energy, and like her battle skill, it will create an area that heals operators in it, buffs the team's attack, and locks her out of both basic attacks and dodges, all the while following the controlled operator during its active state. This is distinct from the Vocalist stance, instead being the Cosmo Voice stance, lasting 15 seconds instead of 60, and replacing the Vocalist stance if it was active. This means that once it ends, Liino will always reset to a neutral state. During the Cosmo Voice stance, Liino cannot build any ultimate energy, but it's possible to end it early at no SP cost by pressing the battle skill button, although the ultimate cooldown of 20 seconds must still be respected. Like the battle skill, it provides a 10% attack bonus, but unlike the battle skill, it's fixed in value regardless of the level. There are no additional attacks during it, but its healing pulses also damage enemies and come out twice as fast, every 1.5 seconds. Once the stance expires, it will do one final pulse for 3 times the healing and damage of a regular pulse. Note that this will not happen if the stance is cancelled early. It also provides electric and nature amp to the whole team, scaling with the skills level and Liino's will attribute, maxing out at 60%, with a rate of 0.04% in amp per point of will. That demands 1500 will total, which is only achievable at P5/P5. Most builds of her signature weapon will usually land anywhere between 883 and 1261 will, depending on the amount of ultimate gain efficiency required, giving an amp strength ranging from 35 to 50%. The cast of the ultimate itself immediately applies the amp and leads to Stage Pyrotechnics, a burst of team-wide healing that also damages nearby enemies. After a short while, it will strike with Electrifying Extravaganza, a burst of damage within 20 stagger and forcibly applying electrification to enemies hit, with a standard 12-second duration. Since the amp state is active from cast, in practice, the delay between the ultimate use and electrification being applied means that they expire at similar times. It's worth keeping in mind this time gap between the Stage Pyrotechnics cast and the Electrifying Extravaganza hit. For some operators, like Fangyi, there may not be enough time to fit all of her bursts in the amp state of waiting for the electrification to land. Doing it too early may even mean dropping it right before the final hit of an enhanced battle skill. On the flip side, if left for too late, it could override Perlica's stronger electrification, leading to a huge damage loss. This would mean either pushing out ultimate so that burst happens between the initial cast and the electrification hit, or better yet, working earlier into rotations to maximize value from the amp. Tailoring ultimate timing to a team is part of the skill expression on Liino. Liino's combo skill is Delightful Harmonics, having a short 8-second cooldown, dealing middling electric damage, healing the controlled operator, and, most importantly, generating 20 ultimate energy on hit. It's because of this skill that Liino's 160 energy ultimate requirement isn't as daunting as it first appears. It's triggered when an arts reaction is applied or consumed while in the Vocalist stance. That means this combo skill cannot be triggered during ultimate or in a neutral state. Liino's Force Electrification isn't going to trigger a combo skill since the ultimate will put her in the Cosmo Voice stance, which is not Vocalist. If it's triggered before the ultimate though, then she's still able to cast it, and it won't cancel the Cosmo Voice stance. It also won't cancel the Vocalist stance, so it can be used freely while she's in it. It will, however, temporarily halt its interrupt resistance as she executes the skill, so be careful with enemy attacks. If Liino is knocked down during her combo, that will cancel her stance. It's for this reason that having Liino be the last operator on a team order is preferable. It has a very long recovery animation, so minimizing the time in which you can be hit during it is ideal. Time stop can be exploited for this, but if another operator, like Arclight, has their combo skill be used after, it will supersede the time stop and lead to a longer period where Liino is in an unsafe state. There are other character-specific interactions that make her going last to be best, which will be covered in more detail later. The combo skill will only build energy and stagger on its last hit, and despite its high energy gain, has a very low stagger value of 5. Given the low cooldown though, it can match up or even exceed the stagger build of other operators if the team can sustain frequent uses. Most of the time, Liino will fall behind other operators in total stagger, but the main purpose of the combo skill is to build up to her ultimate. It's also able to condense rotations owing to her talents, namely Starry Boost of First Magnitude, her second talent. For 30 seconds after using her combo skill, the next battle skill of any electric or nature operator returns 10 SP. This effect does not stack and is consumed on trigger, so after using one combo skill, one electric or nature operator's battle skill will return 10 SP, but the second, third, or any others after will not, unless the combo skill is used again. Conversely, if using 2 combo skills with no battle skills between them, the effect only applies to the next singular battle skill. This can actually matter for certain rotations, where actively avoiding its effect is the goal. Depending on the number of combo skills used, this can make Liino be a net contributor to SP, as after 30 SP being returned, she's adding more to the team than what was used on her battle skill. But that's as much of a boon as it is a curse, as SP return does not build ultimate energy. Keep this in mind when calculating the ultimate gain efficiency thresholds for different rotations. Her first talent, Idle Zone, is much simpler, providing a 20% increase of treatment received and a 20% damage reduction buff to operators inside the AoE of her stances. Even after leaving, the effects persist for another 3 seconds, and with Liino following the controlled operator around, it can have very good uptime. It doesn't provide any damage gains as her attack and amp buffs are tied to her battle skill and ultimate directly, but it's a nice to have for survivability and could prove to be very useful for endgame modes like Contingency Contract. Last on her list of skills is Starry Heartthrob, Liino's basic attack, and it happens to be surprisingly good. It's a 5-sequence string which recovers 20 SP and deals 20 stagger in its final strike. Its multipliers aren't extraordinary, but it has animation cancel points on every single one of its sequences. Basic 1 can be cancelled after the first swing, Basic 2 can be cancelled as soon as the purple effects appear on the polearm twirl. Basic 3 can be cancelled when projectiles first fire, and the same is true for Basic 4. But Ashe's basic attack lock during her Vocalist and Cosmo Voice stances, of which should be up at all times to maximize buff value, isn't ever an opportunity to use it. The lockout isn't only for the controlled state. You aren't getting any of her basic attack damage while non-controlled as well. There is a silver lining to this though. Normally, non-controlled operators will basic attack without any player input being required. If the team is in combat, they'll engage the enemy, and this can add up to a non-negligible amount over the course of a fight. Except when they don't basic attack. It's not uncommon to see at least one operator on the team walking around and doing nothing. It isn't a melee problem either, as ranged operators idle too. That's because non-controlled operators fill up basic attack slots. At any given time, only a certain number of basic attacks can be performed by non-controlled operators. Perlica may start attacking and does 2 full basic attack strings. Then as she's finishing, Fangyi starts attacking and does 2 full basic attack strings. And as she's finishing, Arclight starts attacking and does 2 full basic attack strings. Ish, operators can be interrupted. Then it's back to Perlica and so on. There can be situations where multiple operators attack together. If they're forced to stop their basic attacks, like due to enemy mechanics, dodges, having to reposition from being out of range and so on, the lost time appears to be made up by overlapping slots. You may even see all 3 non-controlled operators attack together, but only for a brief moment, then it's back to alternating. It isn't necessarily a fixed order. Fangyi can do a string, it goes to Perlica, then it's back to Fangyi again. But on the aggregate, everyone gets their turn. The problem with this is that some operators are simply better than others. On a Mifu physical team, it's great when Chen is the one attacking. But if Pogranishnik or Ardelia take the slot, they won't hit anywhere near as hard. As it turns out, that is a damage loss. It might not be as visible, but it can add up, especially in longer fights. This is where Liino's basic attack lock becomes a benefit, because it removes her from the basic attack slot queue. This means that the remaining 2 operators will keep bouncing back and forth between each other. It's not that her stances give more non-controlled operator basic attacks, she merely makes it so that the remaining operators are guaranteed to be the ones to take up slots. In a Fangyi team, that means more opportunities for Perlica to basic attack, or in an Arcane team, that means more opportunities for Tangtang to basic attack. So if your non-controlled operators are built, Liino indirectly increases the overall team damage. It's a pity that her own basic attack never gets used, but that sacrifice isn't done in vain. After all, as nice as her basics can be, it's better to have another operator that's going to actually do damage attack instead. The basic attack lock also prevents dive attacks, but it can still see some use, just not in regular combat. It has 2 distinct active hitbox points, the dive and the twinkle fallout. So if you're trying to maximize coins on the rooted realm, it's pretty handy. And although it's not a skill per se, Liino does have a double dash with a unique animation. It isn't the fastest, but it's nice to use every now and then if running around for daily content. When it comes to skill priority, it's pretty simple. Ultimate is the most important. It doesn't reach its maximum amp scaling until M3, so the higher it goes, the stronger Liino's buffs get. Combo and battle skill compete for second, depending on the team. When there are plenty of combo skill trigger opportunities, like in Fangyi teams, the cooldown reduction from higher levels can be important. Otherwise, battle skill levels increase its attack buff, so it's good to have. As the ultimate's attack buff is fixed at 10%, Liino will always have it up for burst periods, but getting extra damage before it does add up, so it's worth investing in it. And she does do damage, even while in her stances. So while she isn't a particularly big contributor, Liino still ranks far ahead of other supports like Xaihi or Gilberta. At the very least, she's able to keep up with an operator like Arclight. It may not be good, but it's not terrible, so there's some value on increasing her ultimate, combo and battle skill even outside of their primary benefits. The exception to this is her basic attack. Since Liino doesn't get to use it while in her stances, it can be safely left out one. As for weapons, Liino's signature is a standout pick. It's called Bedazzling Night Debut, and it's incredibly strong. It has a matching main attribute line 1 stat, as expected, and a treatment efficiency on line 2, which is not very good for most content. I'm sure that it'll pull its weight on future contingency contract seasons, and when considering how much damage Liino can be subject to owing to not being able to dodge while in stances, it's not a completely dead stat, but it doesn't provide any damage benefits. Instead, that's all loaded on line 3, with a steep 25.6% and unconditional main attribute bonus, a stacking attack buff that's applied to other operators when they're healed, which maxes out at 22.4% total with 4 stacks, counted separately and lasting 20 seconds each. The main attribute is a direct increase to Liino's buff value, as more will means better amp scaling on her ultimate. For comparison, a standard Eternal Sure Knight build rocking a single auxiliary arm on a Link Slab goes from 892 will when using the Battle Pass weapon to 1072 will with the signature. That's a gain of 7.2% in amp value on her ultimate, roughly 5.3% relative increase. Then there's the attack buff. It alone is stronger than a P3 Thermite Cutter, the weapon that has carried the Vanguard class, being the equivalent of a permanent P5 stanza. Permanent because despite it only building on heals and having distinct stacks, Liino's battle skill pulses for a heal every 3 seconds, her combo skill can be used every 8 seconds, and her ultimate has both a heal on cast and pulses every 1.5 seconds, so it might as well be an unconditional buff. From Liino's battle skill alone, so without combo skills to +1 stacks early, it takes 12 seconds from its cast to build up to max, after which it's up for the rest of the fight. There are some caveats to it though. The buff builds only on healing, so operators outside of Liino's stances won't gain stacks. Likewise, the combo skill heal is to the controlled operator. So when you swap to another operator that hasn't been in range, the buff stack on them may be lower but not be present at all. The only skill in her kit that provides a direct team-wide heal is her ultimate cast, and with non-controlled operators running about, maximizing full uptime of this on all of them isn't feasible. As Liino takes up her basic attack slot, it isn't as bad when running melee operators. They get more turns at attacking and need to be up and close to hit, so hogging the enemy and using Liino's combo skill can help them overlap. On an Avywenna team, for example, both her and Perlica are going to be sitting at max stacks, as Avywenna's combo skill puts her close to enemies, so between that and Liino's 1.5 second heal interval on ultimate, there's no active management needed. For ranged operators though, like with Tangtang on an Arcane team, this is harder to maintain, making proper operator swap management more important, which does lessen the weapon's buff value somewhat. So not quite a permanent stanza, as how many stacks the team has can vary. But it still ranks significantly above any other alternative. Most roll arms are tailored to increase operators' personal damage. Even with frequent combo skill casts, Liino isn't doing much on that front, so Cohesive Traction and Jet are going to be significantly worse. Golden Age is the battle pass weapon made for Liino, but its stats are tragic. Like with her signature, it has a will stat line 1 and treatment efficiency bonus on line 2. Line 3 provides a bit of personal damage with electric damage dealt, more treatment efficiency after landing combo skills, and up to 14% arts damage dealt on healing for 20 seconds, so it's effectively up at all times. Unlike Liino's signature, this buff has only 1 stack and applies to the entire team upon any HP treatment being given to another operator, so it's a lot easier to manage. The problem is in its value. For context, a 5-star Wild Wanderer gives 22.4% in damage dealt, on top of arts intensity, which buffs arts damage taken from electrification. OBJ Arts Identifier, another 5-star, also provides 22.4% in damage dealt. OBJ Edge of Lightness can go up to 25.2% when at 3 stacks. Granted, these are specific to certain elements like physical, electric, and heat, but Liino is strictly a nature and electric support, so having a general damage dealt buff isn't much of a value add. It does make it be a bit more competitive in teams with Tangtang, but that doesn't make up for the raw disparity in buff value. From calcs on different weapons, you can refer to data field to review the sheets and rotations used. Her P5 Golden Age is a full 15% behind in team damage than her signature on a Fangyi team. That's such a big gap that, depending on the rotation, between Fangyi and Liino's signature weapons, Liino's is more important. It's a very small margin, so really they're about even, but I make such a comparison to emphasize the value that she gets from Bedazzling Light debut. Thankfully, there is a degree of team-oriented performance disparity. On an Arcane team with Tangtang, the difference between Bedazzling Light debut and Golden Age drops from 15% to 8.5%, as attack and amp saturation, coupled with Golden Age's team-wide arts damage buff, helps lessen the gap. It's still sizable, but since the performance between a P0 and P5 Golden Age is negligible, at worst a little over 1.5% on a Fangyi team, it's safe to get a single copy of it and save up on Battle Pass crates and dupe items for more important weapons. And just in case you're wondering, Beacon of Duty doesn't work here. It provides enough in ultimate gain efficiency to allow for Liino to replace an armor and glove, opening up pure will builds. But even then it wouldn't be any more will than an Eternal Sure Knight auxiliary arm setup with Golden Age. Considering a pure will build has to give up on the Eternal Sure Knight set effect and ends up with even less ultimate gain efficiency than the auxiliary arm variant, it isn't worth considering. A 1 combo skill rotation wouldn't have enough ultimate energy even with 4 ultimate gain efficiency pieces, so Beacon of Duty can't even be used to hit a new breakpoint. Outside of incredibly niche speedruns or high potential scenarios, it's not worth considering. With all this talk on ultimate gain efficiency, auxiliary arm variants, and so on, it's worth going over Liino's gear and her energy breakpoints, as they go hand in hand. The 160 energy cost on her ultimate seems steep, but when considering that her combo skills give 20 energy on hit and it has only an 8-second cooldown at M3, she can build up to it without needing all that much in ultimate gain efficiency. The SP returns from her talent on teammate battle skill cast after her combo skill does need to be factored in. More combo skills means less energy from SP. so all of it rides on how often her combo skill can be triggered. Let's assume a 625 SP rotation standard, 6 ally battle skills and 25 SP from Liino's battle skill. On a Fangyi team, Liino can get up to 5 combo skills before a burst period for 100 energy. This does mean 50 SP being returned though, amounting to 575 SP worth of energy. That demands at least 16.5% in ultimate gain efficiency, which means that even a fully artificed armor won't be enough. This sets the scene for how Liino is geared. At 0 ultimate energy starts, she will almost always demand at least 2 ultimate gain efficiency pieces. There are some exceptions. If Liino is using 5 combo skills but does so with only 40 SP being returned, like if she gets her ultimate on the 5th combo skill cast, then a single armor is just about enough. 700 SP rotations accommodate for this too, but there isn't much of a gain to be had here. Rift Tracker hands would be the most will she can get on the slot, so she could make do with an Eternal Sure Knight light armor and 2 link slabs, but that means no set effect. Since Liino can trigger Eternal Sure Knight with her ultimate, it'll be the better pick for most rotations. She can use an Eternal Sure Knight light armor on hands for 42.72% in ultimate gain efficiency, comfortably clearing requirements, making for easier rotations, and more damage than building for will. The only exception to this is in a Fangyi team, but damage dealt is such a saturated stat that pushing for more will is a marginally better choice. It's also the only team as of Liino's release that can even reliably work with 5 combo skills, as even Avywenna-Arclight comes to optimize around 4 combo skills. In such cases, she'd only need 35.6% in ultimate gain efficiency, which is covered by the armor and glass. The remaining kit slot could be filled by a bracing slab. It has the highest roll out of the Eternal Sure Knight pieces and helps a bit with damage and healing due to its secondary attribute bonus. There are many situations where more ultimate gain efficiency is needed though. Dropping to a 500 SP spend for more accelerated rotations demands around 43.5% in ultimate gain efficiency, more than what those 2 pieces can provide. Well, not always. Like with the 5 combo skill rotations, depending on the skill order, Liino could lower her SP return. If that's the case, then a 500 SP rotation is functional, as she'd only be dealing with a loss of 30 SP, not 40. If going down to 3 combo skills at 600 SP, however, she'd need 62.15%. In such cases, an auxiliary arm can fill the kit slot, bringing up her total ultimate gain efficiency to 74.76%. This covers 500 SP rotations too, and the difference in will from the bracing slab is very slight, at 18 points. That's the equivalent of 0.72% in amp, and assuming no other sources of it besides Liino herself, makes for only 0.5% in relative gains. So while the bracing slab is going to be the highest will she can get on the Eternal Sure Knight set, using an auxiliary arm is a safer choice. There are, however, rotations in which Liino may only get 2 combo skills, like those with Int Arcane if Perlica isn't on the team. These have steep ultimate gain efficiency demands, to the point that Link Slab has to be dropped for another auxiliary arm, and the loss of will is noticeable, as she's left with only 882. A single auxiliary arm build would have 7.6% higher amp, a relative increase of roughly 5.62% over a double auxiliary arm setup. This does reduce Liino's value, but it's the only way around it for teams that don't apply or consume reactions frequently. Even then, her buff value is still incredibly high, being an unquestionable upgrade over previous operators on all electric and nature teams regardless of which build variant is used. The variety in her buffs, attack percent from stances, amp from ultimate, and damage dealt from Eternal Sure Knight keep her relevant regardless of situation. There is one problem with Eternal Sure Knight on Liino though, which is that she can only trigger this during her ultimate. Her idle zone talent reduces damage taken, but that's not protection. The attack percent buffs on her battle skill don't meet the criteria for triggering Eternal Sure Knight either, so it's only up after she ultimates. Given its 15-second duration, it'll match up to Liino's ultimate. The buff can even be used as a way to track how long is left on the Cosmovoid stars. The limited uptime on the set means that there are good alternatives, like using a link set if the additional ultimate gain efficiency from an auxiliary arm isn't needed. It still uses the Eternal Sure Knight light armor for will and ultimate gain efficiency, but the gloves can be replaced with a Link's Gauntlets T1, and then 2 Link Slabs are used as kits. That provides the same amount of ultimate gain efficiency as a bracing slab build, but with a lot more will. 1261 instead of 1090, giving an amp value of around 50.4% rather than 43.6%. Granted, that's an increase of around 6.8%, which isn't quite as much as the 16% damage out from Eternal Sure Knight, but it's very competitive when considering that many teams can get heavily saturated in damage dealt. To be fair, even on a Fangyi team, one of the most damage dealt saturated teams in the game, Eternal Sure Knight still pulls out ahead. We're talking less than 1% here, so both are valid options to Fangyi teams. Generally though, where damage dealt tends to not be as saturated, Eternal Sure Knight will be a clear winner. but Link's builds would be best if Eternal Sure Knight is being filled by another operator. It can also be a priority pick for fights against very aggressive enemies, given that Liino can just, die. The slight damage loss may be a worthwhile trade-off for survivability. If running her own content with full automated starts, like Re-Crisis, then a pure will build may be the optimal choice. That's going to be Rift Tracker Light Armor on hands, as they have the highest roll out of all pieces in their respective slots, and then 2 Link Slabs as kits. There's also one more gear option for Liino, and that's Catastrophe. Liino's battle skill is very cheap, being used at the very start of the fight, so it can instantly trigger the 50 SP return on the set effect. As the set also gives 20% in ultimate gain efficiency, by using a Catastrophe Heavy Armor T1, an ultimate gain efficiency glove, and 2 Catastrophe filters, she can get even more ultimate gain efficiency than a standard armor and glove setup. The will is going to be abysmal, but it can be a worthwhile choice in some speedrun scenarios. So to summarize Liino's gearing, use an Eternal Sure Knight Light Armor, hands, and a Link Slab as the base. On rotations with at least 4 combo skills, an Eternal Sure Knight Bracing Slab fills the last slot. On those that can only get 3 combo skills, replace the Bracing Slab with an Auxiliary Arm. And on rotations that only get 2 combo skills, a second Auxiliary Arm replaces the Link Slab. If Eternal Sure Knight is already being filled by another operator on a 4 combo skill rotation, then using an Eternal Sure Knight Light Armor, Link's Gauntlets T1, and 2 slabs will give the highest value without overlapping on buffs. Certain 5 combo skill rotations and highly damaged out-saturated teams, like with Fangyi, could use a will boosting setup with Eternal Sure Knight Light Armor, Rift Tracker hands, and 2 Link Slabs. And on 4 ultimate energy starts, Liino can run a pure will setup with Rift Tracker Light Armor, but only if Eternal Sure Knight is being filled by another operator, as in most circumstances, its bonuses will still be superior. Lastly, Catastrophe Heavy Armor, an ultimate gain efficiency glove, and 2 Catastrophe filters can work for niche speedrun scenarios where SP is a limiting factor. Liino's potentials can also affect her gear choices, like her P1, which returns 25 SP when using her first battle skill and increases both it and her ultimate stance's attack bonus by 6%. This effectively makes her opening battle skill free to use, with it consuming no SP, nor giving any ultimate energy back as a result. Problem is, this messes with some rotations. Rift Tracker hands on a 6 battle skill 5 combo skill rotation is no longer a viable build, as the loss of energy from her battle skill cast prevents it from functioning. Other operators' energy thresholds have to be considered too. P1 Arcane gets an extra 10 SP return on the 30 from her combo skill detonation, for 40 total in her rotation, and P1 Tangtang gets an extra 5 SP return per Whirlpool, and since she converts 3, it's adding 15 SP to the 60 she was already returning. Put them together, and even without any combo skill returns from Liino's talent, Arcane goes above the 46.4% ultimate gain efficiency that she gets from her weapon. Had the 25 SP from Liino's battle skill been there, the rotation would work. Keep this in mind when mathing out the ultimate gain efficiency thresholds and rotations tailored to specific fights and to future characters. In fact, some of the fastest Fangyi rotations for the current Echoes of War Sky drummer would be affected, as they are tight on energy as is. Thankfully, this isn't a bricked account potential, as there's an easy way around it. As the SP return is tied only to Liino's first battle skill cast, it's possible to simply drop it and cast it again. The second use will use the 25 SP as normal and would lead to the same resource spend and generation as P0 Liino. It does lead to a 3-second drop on the attack buff from Vocalist stars, but the 6% attacking from the potential more than makes up for this minuscule loss of uptime. Rotation impact aside, this potential is a small overall gain, landing between a 3 and 4% team damage increase depending on saturation. There's some irony on all of these energy issues because the SP return may yield a greater gain than the attack, as it allows for more condensed rotations. Fangyi Liino teams, be them with Arclight or Arcane, can certainly appreciate it, as the SP economy on either of them is tight as is, but the actual gain from this potential can be a lot higher. P2 is a lot simpler, being a standard increase of main attribute with treatment efficiency as an extra bonus. It's fine. The 20 will is applied to her base, so the main attribute percent gains from her signature on Link Slab do boost this further. A 1090 will build would go to 1121, so it's a 1.24% bonus to her ramp, but roughly 0.86% relative increase. On Fangyi and Arcane teams, this is even more saturated, but the actual gains are a little over 0.5%. Treatment efficiency does nothing to damage, be it her own or her team's, and while it can be nice for survivability, it isn't adding value to most situations, so this is a rather middling potential. Her P3 is a 1-second reduction to her combo skill cooldown, as well as a times 1.4 increase to its damage and healing. The combo skill cooldown is really helpful at aligning rotations. The times 1.4 increase to combo skill damage is a big multiplier increase, but Liino isn't hitting hard enough for it to matter much. The healing increase also does nothing for damage, being a small boost to survivability and not much else. P4 is a standard 15% decrease to ultimate energy cost, taking it from 160 to 136 energy. For a Fangyi team, this isn't doing much. Using Liino's ultimate earlier to get a free electrification isn't a good idea, as it means that her amp effect is going to be expiring sooner, meaning that it won't be up in full for the burst. It's not as if her gearing changes. Eternal Shieldite is a priority for most rotations, given that it's better than a double link snap setup for all but the most saturated of teams. The value then ranges on the team and encounter. As for Arcane, even with the SP return from P1, Liino could drop an auxiliary arm for a link slab and get back the 7.6% amp she'd be missing, making for a decent increase to the team's damage. In fact, it'd be a little more owing to P2's will bonus. Then there's P5, her best potential. From a visual standpoint, Liino gets more than the usual change. Unique footstep effects are added as an additional aesthetic bonus exclusive to her. From a numerical perspective, it gives a times 1.2 increase to her ultimate amp, as well as a times 1.2 multiplier increase to her battle skill and ultimate damage. The increase to the amp can be very competitive as it's applied to the effect's strength. 30% amp is a times 1.3 multiplier, so if that goes up to times 1.36, that's a relative increase of around 4.6%. 50% amp is a times 1.5 multiplier, so if that goes up to times 1.6, that's a relative increase of around 6.6% instead. This synergizes with Liino's signature weapon dupes as well as her P2, and more importantly, P4, as maximizing her will gives outsized benefits. The change from P4 to P5 amounts to over 6% in team damage. Since Bedazzling Knight debut dupes increase its main attribute bonus, and therefore Liino's will, that's even more value from this potential. So while most of her potentials are so-so, at P5, and especially double P5, it all comes together. And now that we've gone through all of Liino's kit, we can talk about her game plan, which ends up being very simple. For most of the fight, she's a set and forget operator. It's very important to use her battle skill first, as her entire kit is locked behind it. She needs it to apply the attack buff to teammates, as well as get her combo skill triggers. As her weapons, be it signature or battle pass, are conditional on healing for their buff effects to activate, it needs her battle skill to be up to. So once it's up, take her combo skill as it comes. A slow cooldown means that there isn't much of a need to be particular about alignment in most circumstances, but it's worth keeping an eye on it depending on the rotation. Perhaps more important is making sure that her combo skill isn't used when enemies are using knockback attacks, as Liino may get caught on the crossfire and sent flying, which would cost the rotation another 25 SP to put her back in Vocalist stance. When it's time to burst, the ultimate should be ready assuming the correct build is used for a given rotation, to use it for its amp and electrification. Do be mindful of the electrification though. The delay on it means a bit of adjustment is needed to integrate it into rotations, like timing it to land right before Fangyi's finisher or using it early to avoid overriding Perlica's electrification. After 15 seconds, her ultimate expires and she exits all stances, to use the battle skill again and repeat the cycle. Even though she can end her battle skill and ultimate early, it should be actively avoided outside of P1 adjustments, as the former increases the SP cost of rotations and the latter is an outright damage loss. Her skill expression really isn't tailoring rotations to get the most benefit from her ultimate, as the rest is relatively forgiving. That's going to be team dependent though, so let's talk a bit about them. Since Liino buffs electric in nature, her teams are going to revolve around operators that work with those elements. Being your support, her synergies are riding primarily on the main damage dealer, as they will be the biggest beneficiaries of her buffs. Fangyi is a star pick. Out of all current operators, she's the one that gets the biggest uplift from Liino's presence. Gilberta was never a particularly good support for her. Fangyi can get 6 enhanced battle skills in her ultimate, and Gilberta's own ultimate lasts for barely 1.5 casts. Her corrosion doesn't work all that well either, as every electric infliction is valuable and higher electrification stacks translates to a direct multiplier increase to Fangyi's battle skills. It's to the point Arcane was a better pick to Fangyi teams, owing to her arts inflictions at least allowing for corrosion setups, but her susceptibility is strictly for cryo and nature damage. Liino then comes around with the highest buff value for electric teams while having both relatively long-lasting and inexpensive buffs. The attack gains from her stances and signature weapon are up at all times, and since Fangyi does get a fair bit of damage from her pre-ultimate battle skill casts, it adds up. The team-wide amp on her ultimate is also one of the longest in the game at 15 seconds, being enough to cover Fangyi's finisher as well as 3 enhanced battle skills. All that Liino needs is one battle skill cast at 25 SP cost and then that's it. Compared to others like Anta or Ardelia, whose battle skill demand a full 100 SP, Liino has no real resource cost. In fact, she's a net contributor. The SP return on electric battle skill use helps with Fangyi's steep SP needs. It may only trigger once per combo skill, but Fangyi's teams are constantly applying and consuming electrification, so it can give back up to 50 SP in offset rotations. There are some issues. The electrification on Liino's ultimate being delayed can make for very tight execution demands to get the most damage out in her amp's duration. 15 seconds may be longer than most, but that's not long enough. At best, only 4 out of a potential 6 Fangyi enhanced battle skills get buffed in full, which does lead to a sizable damage fall-off after the initial burst. That's about it though. More nitpicking than genuine drawbacks, as it's clear that the missing link to Fangyi teams is Liino. And Arcane gets great benefits too. Although not as much as Fangyi, her other team options aren't particularly strong contenders. The short duration on Gilberta's ultimate matters for Arcane too. The value she adds to a short burst is big, but Arcane's at her best going through multiple cluster strikes, battle skills, and enhanced combo skills. Gilberta's susceptibility is great, but it isn't able to keep up with Liino's combined amp and attack buffs, especially if signature weapons are considered. Her damage contribution to the team is mostly on corrosion, but Arcane can supply that. AKEF sees similar issues. Her ult and thermite cutter are far off the attack given by Liino and her signature, not to mention Liino's is up at all times. She does offer length though, which is quite strong, being a times 1.2 multiplier to one skill, which in Arcane's case is her second ultimate cast. That hits hard, yes, but it amounts to around 1/6 of the total rotation damage. Between Liino's arts damage taken on electrification and her ramp, even after accounting for saturation, is going to be providing a near 30% damage increase during the burst period, for every skill, and not just the ultimate second cast. That's not including the attack bonuses, mind you. So as far as total damage goes, she's far above the competition. That isn't to say she can't be run with said competition. Maybe Gilberta isn't keeping up with Liino in terms of damage, but she's as much of a stagger support as a damage one, so running Gilberta on Swordmaster and pushing for a fast stagger can lead to very fast clears. Still, it's not perfect. Even in that comp, Xaihi isn't going anywhere, so Arcane teams get massively saturated on amp, and what Liino does give is lower than in other comps, as she needs to drop Link Slap for the rotation. Not all suffer from this. Perlica, for example, can help, but the best Arcane teams are often going to be running Tangtang. This is still very nitpicky though, and doesn't change the fact that Liino is a clear improvement. The difference is stark, especially as the long duration on her ramp opens up more extended, but far more damaging rotations. As said in the intro, damage isn't everything, so there are situations where Liino may not be standout best in slot, but she is the best for damage. The last main damage dealer that gets a boost from Liino is Avywenna. There isn't much to it, it's really a numbers game. Unlike the comparisons to AKEF on Arcane teams, her buff value is much higher. Even when accounting for Link being times 1.3 on a battle skill and the rotation damage being loaded on it, Liino's amp isn't saturated and she can get even more of it. Not to mention that Perlica does no small amount of damage herself. In fact, she can do almost 80% of Avywenna's damage. Liino's buffs apply to both of them after all. She also gets stagger from her ultimate, and this makes a big difference when pushing for faster kills. Gilberta is still the better operator for the team here though, as the gain from an arts intensity boosted corrosion is too big to pass up on, but not by as much as you might think. That's because most rotations with Avywenna need to do a 1-3 split with combo skills. That's 1 combo skill, 1 battle skill, then 3 combo skills, and 1 battle skill. It's needed to sustain her ultimate energy needs, and this means only 9 Thunder Lances during the burst. But Liino's forced electrification can allow for 8 battle skill rotations with Arclight, where she can sustain Wildland Tracker's buff for the burst and a fair bit of the added stagger damage too. So if you happen to like Avywenna and have Gilberta, Liino is a huge improvement over previous teams. If you don't have Gilberta, she's an even bigger one, making for very competitive rotations. An Arclight-Liino team may not do as much total damage as a Gilberta-Liino one, but surprisingly, it can kill as fast, if not faster. Again, it's not perfect. The electrification from Liino's ultimate can grief rotations, as if it replaces Perlica's, results in a significant drop in damage. The rotations can get very strict, but that's about it. Even the attack on heal from her signature tends to align naturally on non-controlled Avywenna owing to her being a melee, so even that isn't a concern. Of course, there are still synergies with operators that aren't working as main carries. Will Arcane is the obvious match. She covers corrosion and, depending on her weapon, arts damage taken, which are diversified buffs from Liino's attack and amp. Either one can run Eternal Shuronite, which frees up the other. Arcane could run arts intensity pieces, as could Liino go for double link snaps to increase her amp value. Having more inflictions from Arcane's combo skill and ultimate also means more opportunities for reactions, with the two likely to be the strongest nature supportive operators in the near future. Perlica can be a great match, with her forced electrification sustaining Liino's own combo skill triggers. Although she can't run Eternal Shuronite, Perlica can do decent damage, and she benefits in full from Liino's buffs. Considering they're both staples of electric teams, it will be one of the most common pairings. Gilberta works well too, echoing many of the benefits of other operators. Susceptibility is distinct from Liino's buffs, and the two can flex Eternal Shuronite, allowing for Gilberta to run arts intensity for corrosion. Both also have reaction-based combo skill triggers, so a team that accommodates one is likely to do so for the other. Then there's Arclight. On teams where she can make use of her battle skill to set up Wildland Tracker, she's going to help sustain Liino's combo skill triggers. The electric infliction on her ultimate and its electrification conversion streamlines rotations, and with both her and Liino's low combo skill cooldowns and matching trigger criteria, they can be used together. In fact, triggering both their combo skills simultaneously is in itself a synergy. Liino's combo skill cooldown may be short, but unlike other short cooldown abilities like Arclights and Alashes, using Liino's does not stop combo skill cooldowns from ticking. Since the latest time stop always takes priority, by having Liino cast her combo skill shortly after Arclight, this overrides her cooldown pause, which allows for even more accelerated rotations. Technically, Liino can also work with anyone, regardless of element. Between Bedazzling Knight debut and Liino Stasis, the universal 32.4% attack buff is nothing to scoff at. Not to mention the 12% arts damage taken from the force electrification on her ultimate. There have even been players getting competitive times with her in non-electrical nature teams, like using her with Lavatine on multi-target stages, as Infliction build isn't as important, and the unconditional nature of Liino's buffs can make her a competitive choice with other operators. These are some niche scenarios though. While you can kind of throw her anywhere if you have her signature weapon, I wouldn't pull her for it. After all, for the teams Liino is a best pick for, she's incomparable in her value add. Before we talk about the rotation, let's quickly go over some of the builds. For Fangyi, she's using the standard Chiron Flow Light Armor, gloves, and one baton, with a Link Slab off-piece as she has no need for ultimate gain efficiency with this rotation. She's best paired with her signature for the weapon. Perlica's rocking the Chingbo set since her combo skill cooldown gates the rotation. That's Chingbo Light Armor and 2 casks. Gloves are the off-piece, any Will Intellect set lines with damage bonuses would fill the spot, like Poster Labs gloves. For the weapon, she's using Wild Wanderer, with it providing consistent buff value to all operators on the team, and it has Arts Intensity on its third line, which increases the value from Perlica's electrification. Detonation unit could be better though. Perlica does get an Arts burst that can trigger it. Given how saturated Fangyi is on damage dealt, having an Arts damage taken and 50 extra Arts Intensity when compared to Wild Wanderer is high value. At P0, Detonation unit falls a bit behind a P5 Wild Wanderer as it comes on late, but given how much of the rotation is loaded on that late burst, a P1 Detonation unit would be pulling ahead. The higher the potential, the bigger the difference. The rotation accommodates both picks without any adjustments being needed. Oblivion on Perlica could be somewhat competitive with Wild Wanderer, especially if Perlica's ultimate lands in stagger. Liino's buffs do apply to her too after all. Unfortunately, as Fangyi's finisher is used over Perlica's and aligning the 5-second attack bonus from Perlica's P3 is too awkward, Wild Wanderer P5 will pull out ahead of Oblivion P0. If you happen to have a P5 Oblivion but only a P0 Detonation unit though, then it could be an option. Arclight is using different tier set. That's Protection Suit, Fiber Gloves T1, and an extra O2 tube. Redeemer Seal is the off-piece, which is a requirement to have enough energy for the early ultimate that makes up the backbone of the offset rotation. Thermite Cutter is the weapon of choice. As for Liino, since she gets 5 combo skill uses throughout the rotation, the Eternal Chironite Bracing Slab variant build for higher will can be used, but by delaying her combo skill use, it's possible to get away with an Eternal Chironite Light Armor, Rift Tracker Hands, and 2 Link Slabs, which would be marginally more damage for Fangyi than the Eternal Chironite set. And surprisingly, her signature is the weapon to use. The principle behind this rotation is to offset electrifications. This is a lot stronger than stacking level 2 electrifications and then consuming them with Fangyi's battle skill. Yannick has a great video that explains why that is, link in the description, but in short, the SP that's being spent on 3 Perlica battle skills is SP not being spent on Fangyi's battle skill. Over the course of the rotation, this results in much lower damage and ultimate energy generated overall. The enabler for this is Arclight, as a free electric infliction on her ultimate can be used instead of Perlica's battle skill. She has enough in ultimate gain efficiency to sustain both an infliction before Fangyi's ultimate and during it, opening up the ability to get a level 3 electrification boosted enhanced battle skill. It's quite simple in practice, and the optimizations in the rotation are tied mostly to specific skill timing requirements. What underpins it all is making sure that Fangyi's final strike lands after Arclight's ultimate applies an electric infliction, then have a combo skill hit before the force electrification can trigger. That way, Fangyi gets the energy bonus from the infliction conversion. Then there's Liino's adjustments, like holding back on her last combo skill so that it comes after Fangyi's final pre-ultimate battle skill, to avoid the SP return effect. Or getting the force electrification to land right as Fangyi's finisher hits the enemy, so that it can be up for it without sacrificing the electric amp effect for all 3 enhanced battle skills. It's better to go through these as they come though, so let's go over the rotation itself. Fangyi is by far and away the stronger operator to basic attack with, so she's going to be the controlled pick. Open with Liino's battle skill to unlock a combo skill, then use Perlica's combo skill as the final strike lands. That triggers both Arclight's and Liino's combo skills, and as soon as Perlica is free from her combo skill animation, use her battle skill for an electric infliction. By the time Fangyi's next basic string reaches its 4th sequence, Arclight's combo skill should be up if Liino's was used after, as the override to Arclight's time stop pause makes a better alignment. Fangyi's battle skill then consumes Perlica's electrification and triggers Arclight's combo skill again. And note that Fangyi can dodge cancel out of her battle skill very shortly after casting it, minimizing its actual downtime, so it should be done where possible. A final strike follows, triggering her combo skill, which itself applies electrification by consuming the electric infliction. This triggers another Arclight combo skill, and once the cooldown expires, Fangyi battle skill again to get Arclight and Liino's combo skills. After that, just go into basic attack, with the second set having its final strike land around the time that Perlica's combo skill is coming off cooldown. If Liino's combo skill is triggered early, it should be up again so it can be used with Arclight. If not, no problem, as Fangyi needs to battle skill at this point to consume Perlica's electrification, triggering another Arclight combo skill, and if Liino's wasn't triggered before, hers too. Although Fangyi's battle skill is needed to consume the electrification, Arclight's combo skill here isn't actually needed, as she already has enough in ultimate energy from the previous cast. On Effigy, a 340 stagger enemy, this helps with making sure that there's enough stagger to align rotations, and it shouldn't cause any issues with 320 stagger either. But some enemies, like the Rika Beast, make frequent use of interruptible attacks that gives too much additional stagger, so using Fangyi's battle skill a little earlier to skip Arclight's combo skill works too, assuming that Liino's cooldowns are aligned. Either way, as Fangyi's gearing up to her final strike, use Arclight's ultimate. This applies an electric infliction, which allows for Fangyi's final strike to trigger her combo skill, and then that consumes the infliction to apply electrification and triggers another set of Arclight and Liino's combo skills. Although if Liino's combo skill didn't get triggered by Perlica's electrification earlier, it might not be up at this point. As always, once Arclight's combo skill is up, the electrification can be consumed with a Fangyi battle skill to trigger it, as well as Liino's if it didn't get triggered before. Perlica's combo skill should be coming up, so reserve the final strike for when it's ready, although enemy attacks may force you to do so anyways. The Perlica electrification from it will trigger Arclight and Liino's combo skills, but if Liino's is up, do not use it. This adjustment is only necessary because of the Rift Tracker hand setup, as avoiding the SP recovery from her talent matters. Once Arclight's combo skill is up, do one final battle skill on Fangyi to trigger it, and then use it alongside Liino's combo skill. Fangyi's final strike should be naturally aligning at this point, so right before it hits, use Liino's ultimate, followed immediately by Perlica's ultimate. Dodge cancel out of Fangyi's final strike recovery for an immediate finisher. Perlica's ultimate lands in stagger, and if everything has been timed correctly, Liino's electrifying extravaganza will hit right before Fangyi's finisher, applying electrification and giving it a 12% arts damage taken bonus. Go into Fangyi's ultimate as soon as the damage registers, and follow with an enhanced battle skill. Arclight's combo skill was triggered by Liino's ultimate, and ideally it'd be used right before Fangyi's ultimate to minimize time stop, but otherwise it can be used here. Basic attack with Fangyi, and time a Perlica battle skill to land right as the electric infliction from Fangyi's enhanced battle skill connects. This gives her an arts burst, which will be stronger than Fangyi's arts burst, and if detonation unit is being used, would trigger its effect. When the final strike connects, use Fangyi's combo skill only. As there's an electrification on the enemy from Liino's ultimate, the 2 electric inflictions on the enemy are converted to a level 3 electrification. That's then consumed by Fangyi's second enhanced battle skill, and as soon as it's used, go into Perlica's combo skill and Arclight's combo skill, the latter of which was triggered by Fangyi's. This way, Perlica's obscenely strong electrification buffs the level 3 boosted enhanced battle skill. Right before its last hit connects though, use Arclight's ultimate. That builds an electric infliction which gives an arts burst to Fangyi, maximizing damage dealt. With proper timing, Fangyi's final strike should land in stagger, and given it has a 300% multiplier, getting the stagger bonus is much appreciated. Use her combo skill immediately, as it's very important that it converts the electric inflictions before Arclight's ultimate detonates. You know it's been done right when the resulting electrification is at level 3 rather than level 2. One last enhanced battle skill and Arclight combo skill can then close out the rotation, with Liino's amp buffs lasting just about enough to cover the full burst. This can be somewhat tight on execution, and a few adjustments can be made to make it easier. Fangyi's final strike doesn't need to be what initiates stagger. If Perlica's ultimate is used right after Liino's, it will initiate stagger in such a way that if a finisher is taken as it hits, Liino's electrification will naturally align with Fangyi's finisher. Trying to eyeball the timing is difficult, with electrification either landing a little too late or too early, which means Liino's amp expires before the third enhanced battle skill. So Perlica's ultimate can be used as a reference point. Likewise, Arclight's ultimate timing can be very tight. Too early and it will lead to a level 2 electrification, too late and Fangyi won't get an arts burst. The damage gained from the arts burst is minuscule though, so using it late is a much safer bet. And lastly, Perlica's battle skill isn't actually required. If the SP that was spent on it is instead conserved for Fangyi, she can still get a full 6 enhanced battle skills. It may come at the sacrifice of a level 3 electrification boosted enhanced battle skill, but quantity is much better than quality if the enemy isn't dying in 3 casts. It's also more forgiving of SP, as if there aren't any perfect dodges in the rotation, going through it too quickly may cause issues, so keep that in mind. One question I'm sure will come up is how does this rotation compare to an Arcane-Liino comp? Turns out, Arcane is surprisingly competitive, owing to the ability to set up 3 or 4 stack erosions. The 500 SP rotations that Arclight-Arcane could pull off aren't going to work anymore with Liino, as it's missing the free electric infliction from Arclight's ultimate. Choose the operator getting replaced after all. By exploiting time stop though, it's still possible to get a free electric infliction, simulating Arclight's ultimate. This allows for similar rotation mapping. With the high infliction application that comes with Arcane, it's possible to get a 4 stack erosion setup. The problem is that a 600 SP rotation without Arclight isn't quite the same as a 600 SP rotation with. Not when Arclight is providing 100 SP before Fangyi even gets her ultimate, and then another 30 during the burst. And there's the fact that corrosion itself demands an arcane battle skill cast, so if anything it's a 700 SP rotation. It's simply not possible to keep up. Well, it is, but you need catastrophe sets for it, which means missing out on either Perlica Arts Intensity or Liino's amp. So in practice, falling back on a route with an ultimate gain efficiency glove can be better. That does enough damage to kill even the Echoes of War Skydrummer faster than a Link Slab and Catastrophe setup. It's going to be less damage overall outside of the plus 50 res Skydrummer, but like I said in the intro, damage isn't what Enfield's endgame is all about. Sacrificing on it for speed can often be the better choice. Considering how loaded Corrosion is in the current Echoes of War, it's doing more than enough to clear. So for now, Arcane takes a lead on Echoes of War, but as soon as Corrosion shilling ends, the next tanky enemy may very well have Arclight pull out ahead. Enough about Fangyi though, let's have a look at Int Arcane, because that ultimate amp works for electric and nature damage. Let's go over the gear being used on the rotation. Arcane is on her usual Int setup, so that's a Hotwork Exo rig, Hotwork Hands PPE, Hotwork Installation Slab, and a Link Slab. Her signature is used as the weapon. Tangtang is able to use her ultimate even without an ultimate gain efficiency piece, so she's rocking a Bone Crusher Heavy Armor T2, Wristband T1, Mask T2, and a Link Slap. You may be thinking that a second Bone Crusher Mask T2 would be better here, but she's so heavily saturated on damage dealt that Link Slap pulls out ahead, although only marginally. And yes, that's also true for a double mask with the My Security Gloves. She's also using her signature, with the arts damage taken on it being especially helpful. Xaihi is running pure int, as Liino can cover Eternal Shironite, so that's a Redeemer Armor, AIC Fieldwork Wraps, and 2 Frontiers Extra 2 Tube T1s. Detonation Unit is the strongest weapon pick, but Chivalric Virtues can work too. Then for Liino, as she only gets 2 combo skills in the rotation, ultimate gain efficiency in every piece is needed, so the double Eternal Shironite Auxiliary Arm setup is used. Her signature is way too valuable, so that's what she's using. Much of this rotation is as standard. Build up 4 non-nature inflictions, then use Arcane's battle skill to get a level 4 corrosion, at which point she should have used 2 combo skills. Another 2 inflictions are applied, giving her a 3rd combo skill, which is enough energy to access her ultimate. Since that applies corrosion again, and that's a reaction, it also works as a free trigger to Liino's combo skill, which gives her an ultimate. Then it's trying to get as much damage in as possible, which in this case is squeezing in Tangtang's ultimate and 2 arcane battle skills, plus her strikes and the Gloom Purge Arcane, getting as much in during her combo skill susceptibility period. Both SP and stagger can be a problem, which does slow things down somewhat. If you get enough perfect dodges, a final strike could be cut out at the end and the rotation would flow smoothly enough. So long as there's enough SP for Arcane's battle skill to be used before her finisher, it's all good. If short on SP though, an extra final strike is needed. Unfortunately, that builds a little too much stagger, and means that the rotation wouldn't normally work out on a 320 stagger enemy like Skydrummer. There's a solution to this though. Like most operators, Tangtang builds 10 stagger with her battle skill. But unlike most operators, this isn't done instantaneously. Note how when using her battle skill, the stagger bar increases as the water spouts hit the enemy, until 10 stagger is built in total. This check on how much stagger has been built seems to also apply to Tangtang's state. The stagger bar will increase, but only as long as Tangtang is in her battle skill. Which means that if, say, she goes into a combo skill animation, the water spouts will continue to hit, but stagger will stop building. In case you're wondering, no, this does not lead to a damage loss. Whether Tangtang combo skills only after 10 stagger has been built or when barely 3 has been built, the end damage is exactly the same. So by making use of early cancels on her battle skill, it's possible to minimize the amount of stagger being applied and allow for an extra final strike over the course of the rotation, ensuring there's always enough SP for a double arcane battle skill and stagger. Just be careful not to cancel too early, as at least 1 water spout hit needs to tick, because the check for whether the battle skill generates energy is also tied to them, so if you find yourself out of juice, that might be the cause. Alright, let's go through the rotation in full. To start with, Liino battle skill for her buffs and Tangtang battle skill to get her combo skill, using it to interrupt the stagger build of her battle skill. After the first final strike, swap to Tangtang and then use Xaihi's battle skill. The swap matters for 2 reasons. First, it helps stack up on Liino's signature attack buff. Since you follow the controlled operator, she'll chase Tangtang around and apply it with healing pulses. Second, Tangtang's final strike will trigger the art sample on Xaihi's battle skill, enhancing her overall damage output. After that's done, swap to Arcane for much the same, attack buff and art samp. Arcane's final strike also builds 1 less stagger than Tangtang, so it's better to maximize the time spent on her. Arcane's final strike will trigger Xaihi's combo skill, but wait a bit until Tangtang's combo skill is ready to go. At which point, use Tangtang's battle skill to trigger her own and Arcane's combo skill, with all 3 being taken together. By having Arcane on the second slot, her time stop takes priority over Tangtang's, which means it's possible to dodge cancel it early to get back to basic attacking faster. This does mean that Tangtang's battle skill isn't benefiting from Xaihi's talent, but that works out better on the long run, because it conserves a whirlpool for later, and this matters. After 1 final strike, swap back to Tangtang and Xaihi battle skill. It's the same as the opener. 1 final strike on Tangtang for Xaihi amp, then swap back to Arcane and do another final strike. This triggers Xaihi's combo skill, which itself triggers Tangtang's and Arcane's combo skills, applying a level 4 corrosion and triggering Liino's first combo skill. You notice that all of this happened really quickly. That's because it's not just Arcane's combo skill that can be dodge cancelled, her battle skill can too. So by doing combo skill, dodge, battle skill, dodge, she can go through it fast. Although really, it's probably better to delay the battle skill a little to maximize the combo skill susceptibility. A final strike follows, and then once again, swap to Tangtang and Xaihi battle skill, with this being the final straight before the stagger. After a final strike, swap to Arcane and gear up for 1 or 2 final strikes. If there's less than 140-ish SP by the final strike, then an additional final strike may be needed. I was a bit below, so I decided to play it safe here and go for one more set. Regardless of which approach is taken, use a Tangtang battle skill. Try doing it as late as possible. This applies a full susceptibility bonus, since 2 whirlpools are stacked, builds a cryo stack to set up for detonation unit, and triggers a wrong combo skill, which again should be taken early to minimize stagger. If an additional final strike was required, then Xaihi's combo skill can be used together to cut on time stop, triggering Arcane's 3rd combo skill. That gives her enough energy to automate and forcibly applies corrosion, which triggers Liino's combo skill. As soon as the automate is over, dodge to begin basic attacking immediately, because building to a final strike as fast as possible is the priority. Use Liino's automate, and then after a short wait, Xaihi's automate. As Liino's electrifying extravaganza is about to hit, use Arcane's battle skill. That way, Liino's automate initiates stagger and Arcane can get its damage to benefit from the electrification, the stagger multiplier, and trigger the additional hits on her combo skill. Dodge cancel the battle skill into a finisher, and with the SP that it provides, use Tangtang's battle skill to apply a Crown Infliction, give it the last bit of energy needed for an automate, as well as a combo skill to set up a whirlpool. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, this doesn't replace the susceptibility on the enemy from the 2 water spouts. The way it works is that it will queue the weaker susceptibility to after, so once the stronger susceptibility runs out, the weaker one is applied. No loss of damage here. Back to the rotation, gear up to an Arcane Final Strike, which builds the SP for one last battle skill. Although in hindsight, I was above the SP requirements here, so I didn't actually need the Final Strike after all. Regardless, Tangtang's automate follows and a Rogue Wave trigger gives a second Crowd Infliction, triggering Arcane's combo skill. It can then be dodge cancelled into her battle skill, which itself can be animation cancelled with her automate, both of which can fit in Tangtang's 2 water spout susceptibility window, and benefit from the susceptibility on Arcane's own combo skill. This is overkilling to such a ridiculous extent that Skydrummer dies before the automate connects. The battle skill was enough to do it. If an enemy manages to survive even after all this, then the additional hits on the combo skill will strike soon after. This is why Xaihi's automate isn't used straight away. In the example here, it's just about enough for the amp to cover the final beam, so the later the better. Animation cancelling Arcane's basic 3 and stagger can help speed it up and make it more lenient, but I didn't bother. Although what I've shown here is technically the most damage, it isn't the fastest. Again, I reiterate the salient words of the intro. Enfield's endgame isn't one that strictly rewards damage. Blue Jay has an incredibly fast 106 speedrun with this exact comp, link in the description, making use of only a singular battle skill and no Tangtang automate. That's more than enough to kill though, so for the current endgame, it'd be better. But if that extra bit of damage is needed, like if you're missing character signature weapons, then this variation may give the boost that allows for a 1 stagger kill. Alright, that's enough of Arcane. Because while she has the highest burst out of the carries, Avywenna can still get highly competitive numbers, and do so even faster.
There's no turning back. Tonight we will rise. The fire that's within, it never dies. A change of the tides. You can't run, you can't hide. There's no turning back. So hold on. We're lighting up the sky. We're lighting up the sky. Hold on. Right here I walk the line. Now it's our time. We own the night. We own the night. We own the night. We own the night.
Before we go over the rotation, let's quickly cover the gear. Avywenna is on a standard Bone Crusher set. So that's Poncho T1, the ultimate gain efficiency on it is needed for the rotation, as well as a Bone Crusher gloves, a figurine, and a link slab. Jet is the weapon of choice, being the de facto Avywenna signature. Perlica is built for damage, outfitted in Pulsar Labs. That's a Disruptor suit, gloves, a calibrator, and a link slab. That relates to her weapon choice, being Oblivion, which is the best in slot pick. Before Liino, with Gilberta Akakuri teams, double calibrators with detonation unit would be better, as buffing Avywenna's damage took priority. But with Liino's buffs applying to all of them, prioritizing Perlica's personal contribution pulls out ahead. Perlica can hit for 80% of Avywenna's damage on a standard setup, but with Link Slab and Oblivion, be it on Arclight or Gilberta teams, she's going to do about the same damage as Avywenna. And that's with the averaged out crit rate and damage, assuming Perlica gets a crit on the finisher or the ultimate, and it's no contest. Arclight is running Frontiers with an ultimate gain efficiency slot, so that's a protection suit, fiber gloves T1, extra O2 tube T1, and an offset redeemer seal. The ultimate gain efficiency is needed to get her ultimate early, and the electrification from it is a big part of what enables the rotation, giving more uses of her battle skill for energy and SP recovery. Oh, and yes, she does use her battle skill, so it's an extra O2 tube T1, and not a regular one, as the more intellect, the better it is for Wildland Trekker. As a weapon, it's the Vanguard standard, the Might Cutter. Lastly, it's Liino, and since she gets full combo skills, it's possible to make do with the Brazen Slap variant. The team doesn't have enough saturation and damage dealt to make Link set better than Eternal Sure Knight, especially with Avywenna running only one Bone Crusher figurine. Her signature is the weapon of choice. The concept behind this rotation is simple. If the team can use 8 battle skills, Avywenna can get her ultimate in time for burst without needing a single Thunderlance recall. This allows for her to get all 12 Thunderlances to hit and stagger with a single battle skill use, significantly increasing her damage over the 9 Thunderlances that she usually gets. Of course, 8 battle skills is a lot of SP, but that isn't much of a concern with Arclight on the team. Using her battle skill is a net drain on SP. It doesn't recover as much as it consumes, but still, it recovers SP. With her P1, each battle skill cast effectively costs 50 SP, but it gives a full 100 SP's worth in energy. Couple that with the SP generation that she gets from triggering her own combo skill, and the actual cost comes down to only 40 SP per use. Plus, it triggers Liino's combo skill, minimizing her ultimate gain efficiency needs and giving the team even more stagger build. So the core of this rotation is keep triggering Perlica and Avywenna's combo skills and consume electrification for Liino's combo skill. Arclight's ultimate provides an additional electrification stack to consume, and the high energy generation from it means that Liino can use her ultimate early, before Perlica's combo skill is up. That helps align everything for stagger and within seconds, burst. Let's go step by step. Begin with Liino's battle skill and gear up for a final strike. Ideally with Avywenna, as Perlica's battle skill is used for an electric infliction to allow for the combo skill to trigger, so we don't want to interrupt the basic attack animation with it. That triggers Perlica and Avywenna's combo skills, which in turn trigger Arclight and Liino's combo skills. Swap to Perlica, not just for more damage from her electric element basic attacks, but also because unlike Perlica, Avywenna will stay up and close as a melee operator, maximizing the chances that she'll get the heal from Liino's battle skill for the signature attack buff. Unless she gets smacked off screen, but it is what it is. At this point, Liino's combo skill cooldown should be near expiry, so use Arclight's battle skill to consume the electrification. That triggers both hers and Liino's combo skills, and the time stop helps buy time for Avywenna's combo skill to come off cooldown. You may need to delay final strikes a bit as you want to try and trigger it as soon as possible, so dodge here and there may be needed. But once the final strike lands, Avywenna combo skill and then Perlica battle skill, although it's fine to hold on to it for a bit to interrupt enemy attacks. Delay the final strike with dodges once more, timing so that it lands as Perlica's combo skill is about to come up. That's another Arclight and Liino combo skill trigger, but this time use Arclight's battle skill straight away. Normally, Arclight can't use her battle skill immediately after a combo skill, as the cooldown won't be ready in time, but because of the time stop interaction between her and Liino, it's no problem, so make sure to have Liino be after Arclight on the team order. As this is Arclight's second battle skill consumption, Wildland Trekker's buff is applied, helping get a bit more damage in this pre-stagger period. As Arclight's combo skill triggers, Perlica should be getting to a final strike. This triggers Avywenna's combo skill, and the time stop on it can be skipped with Arclight's ultimate, as she has just gotten the energy for it. That triggers another electrification, which is enough for another Arclight combo skill, and Liino's combo skill. As the combo skills get used, use a Perlica battle skill for an electric infliction. That ensures Avywenna's combo skill can be triggered regardless of electrification, and sets up for an arts burst later. Arclight's battle skill then follows, triggering another combo skill, and as soon as it's used, skip the time stop on it by using Liino's ultimate. Because Arclight's combo skill cooldown keeps ticking during her ultimate cutscene, it's back up again for the force electrification. After it, immediately battle skill, which refreshes Wildland Trekker once more in time for the burst. Even if Avywenna and Perlica's combo skills are up, wait until after the electrification is consumed to use them. Perlica's electrification triggers one more Arclight combo skill, which when combined with Avywenna's, is enough to stagger Effigy. So far, we're at 7 battle skills, so Perlica battle skill gets used once stagger initiates to get the ultimate energy needed to Avywenna ultimate. The electric susceptibility lands in time for Perlica's arts burst as well as her finisher. Since there's been very little time since Perlica's electrification, not only does all of this benefit from her obscene arts intensity scaling, it also gets a 20% attack from her P3. With the SP recovery from the finisher itself giving enough SP for an Avywenna battle skill to finish things off. And that's the rotation. There isn't much else to it. Don't grief Thunderland's placements and make sure to position yourself in a way that sets them up right when Avywenna's combo skill is due to trigger, but that's par for the course on Avywenna rotations. Other than that, try to stay close to the enemy, especially after Liino's Ormud, as that more or less guarantees that Avywenna is going to be at 4 stacks of Bedazzling Knight Debu's buff. But once you get the hang of it, it's rather straightforward, and the high stagger build from all of these battle and combo skills makes it a very competitive comp. Considering it only uses one 6-star operator, it's incredibly efficient. A Gilberta-Liino team is going to be better for damage, and given the Echoes of War Skydrum is plus 50 res, far more suited to the current endgame. But in all other content, this Arclight variation is going to match or even exceed it in clear times. There's plenty more teams and rotations that Liino can slot into, so before we close, let's have a look at a few more without commentary. Alright, this has been a lot of content for a character that fundamentally comes down to battle skill once, then combo skill whenever it shows up. But what can I say? I'm a Liino, so it should come to nobody's surprise that I'm excited for Liino. I mean, who else is better than Liino to teach you about Liino? It doesn't help that she's right at home in Fangyi teams, and in case you're not aware, Blue Jay and I won the Contingency Contract Creator Tournament, taking home the $10,000 grand prize. And it just so happened that the Fangyi team is the one I sought to master for it. Then there's the fact the first comp I built in this game revolved around Avywenna. There's some history here. So this guide is a lot more detailed than it needs to be. But that's also because I have a lot more experience of the operators and teams that Liino slots into. With her being the premier nature support, who knows, I might just nerd out about a future Liino team soon enough. So if you're interested in detailed character guides, would like to learn about fundamental game mechanics, or just want to see these optimized rotations, why not like, share, subscribe and ring the bell to be notified for when they drop? I've got more videos coming. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.